So a few weeks ago I made a rifle case for one of my regular customers basically, and also at the same time he asked for a pistol case that's basically matching. He wants it made out of the same suede I used for that and the same Sherpa lining, the synthetic wool fabric that I used on that. But a few other things need to be different, like it needs handles on it, it needs a pouch on the front of it. So it's a little bit more complicated project. Anytime you start getting involved with putting zippers in, they add a level of complexity to something that would be kind of surprising for something so common. And also it needs to be padded. And so what I have here is the Sherpa lining, which like I said is like a synthetic wool. And then I use a couple layers of quilt batting as my padding, because I find it makes a nice firm padding. This is a cotton quilt batting, but they also make poly versions of it. And that, combined with the Sherpa, will make a nice padded case. And of course, like I said, it's going to have the same suede on the outside that the other one had. And there's going to be some accent pieces made out of this brown leather. Across the bottom of it, to hold it together, the gusset that's on the zipper, and then the top of the pouch are all going to be covered with that. As well as it's going to be used to make the handles, which was the piece I was just cutting. With a piece of leather inside of it, it'll wrap around and stitch, and then get trimmed even and slicked. And then we can stitch it onto the pouch, and that'll make a fairly simple handle. There's a couple places, like this, the part that's going to be rolled around the edge to cover the edge of the pocket on the front, and the pocket itself, and the part that's going to make the pocket flap, not as much on it, but I need to do just a little bit of skiving on some of this stuff so it'll all fit together nicer without having a lump that I have to stitch through on this edge, because as you can see, this gets pretty thick. So right out here on the ends, I'm going to want to have this skived off. And then I'll even probably skive the suede a little bit so that I don't have a lump there as much when I go to stitch it all together. As usual for skiving, I just usually use my round knife. Now also, it's a possibility that since this is going to be wrapped around, to skive the edges of this so it smooths out as well and fits neater. But I think it's thin enough that it'll be fine the way it is. Just add a little bit more to it if you wanted it to be really nice and smooth. Alright, again, and the point of that is just to make it to where when I go to stitch it together, I don't have as thick of a spot right there. So it'll make it easier to turn everything, and it'll make it easier, of course, just to stitch over it without my machine hiccuping when it goes over. It may still do something weird when it comes off that bump, but I only have to watch that one spot. Oh, I wanted to skive this as well. I want to skive my back edge of this because this is going to be attached and rolled down to make the pouch flat. And so I want to have it a little bit thinner there at the attachment point so it's got folds over better. And this flap is actually a veg tan leather, so I can go ahead and slick these edges which seems like a good idea to make a nicer feeling edge on that flap. So I'm going to go ahead and edge bevel it as well. Our piece here that's going to be for the handles. Basically, I've got this leather piece to stitch in the center of it. And it's all going to need to be glued together. It will need to be edge beveled eventually, but I don't really want to do it right now because I'm going to probably be grinding these pieces off, or at least trimming them off after I get it stitched. Rough up the smooth side of the piece of leather that I've got in, I'm going to be gluing in there. Just by scraping it a little bit. And let's take our edge beveler along that too, on the long side. Then we'll have a little bit more of a rounded handle when we get done with it. Now this won't work with every different type of glue, but since this is a veg tan leather, and I'm using barge cement, which this will work with, you can work with it somewhat wet. I'm actually going to wet the piece of leather down a little bit and let that soak in to make it a little bit more flexible when I go to bend it and shape it to the other piece. Some glues don't adhere as well if the leather's wet. Well, I guess barge cement doesn't adhere as well, but it still sticks. It just takes longer for it to dry to the point that it sticks on contact like it's supposed to. I'm going to let that set up a bit before I go ahead and stitch it. But that's basically what the handle is. It's just going to be one line stitch across there, grind away this and finish the edges, and then these will be the ends that actually attach to the bag. Now a lot of the rest of these pieces, like the suede pieces, this trim that I'm going to be putting on top of the pocket, all that, I'm going to probably stick together with this basting tape before I stitch it. And basting tape is basically a simple double-sided tape. In this case, I'm going to put it on this piece. It's just way easier than glue. See? And that's stuck on, it stays in place. Easy to stitch, because I've got some thinner stuff than this, some 1/4 inch, that is just great for putting in zippers. But I'll probably do that downstairs by the sewing machine. Now I'll be doing the same thing with this pocket flap, because it needs to be stitched on before all the pieces can be put together, before I line it basically and put the Sherpa fabric inside. I want to have this on there. Otherwise I'm putting stitch lines through my lining fabric and everything that I just don't think will look as good. So for lining this up, I'm just going to take one of my side pieces. It's going to be a big rectangular case like this. My pocket piece. And then I basically know where my flap is going to be. Just line it up, stick it down. And while we've got that in there, that's going to close with a piece of Velcro. So I'll grab a piece of Velcro that I've got here. It's a sew-on Velcro. We'll do the same thing with it. We'll stick one piece. Is going to wind up on here. One piece is going to wind up on here. You can also buy Velcro that already has sticky stuff on the back of it. In this case, this is what I found downstairs. I think I have some of the sticky stuff too, but this will work. I do find that the basting tape doesn't gum up the needle on my machine as badly as whatever adhesive is on the back of the Velcro normally. Alright, so which end is which? This is the fuzzy side. Let's put our fuzzy side on our pocket flap, because that's the most likely to interact with somebody's hand. And you see I've got both pieces stuck together. That's on purpose, because then it'll help me position where I want the other piece of the Velcro on the outside of the pocket here, just by folding it down. Like this. And we just gotta make sure our Velcro comes out without peeling off our basting tape, which it did a little bit of. Yeah, take that back and put it back in place. Now we'll need to stitch those, of course, before we put the pocket pieces together, before we put the whole bag together. Alright, now we got a piece here that doesn't have any dye on it. We're going to use some, I'll say walnut oil dye to match the color of this leather. We'll go along that edge, and I'll do that on both of those, and then I'll slick them down with some, probably gum trag. Alright, these make, pretty nice lightweight handles, easy to grip, and with it slicked on one side, and then of course just smooth leather folded over on the other side, it actually makes a pretty good grip. And the smooth leather is going to be to the outside, so when the two handles come together, you're basically gripping something just like that, with smooth leather all the way around. And kind of the trick on lining these handles up is also, we're going to need to attach them onto the bag and then still be able to like fold them down out of the way so that we can stitch the bag itself together. So, first step I think in that, and easiest way to attach these, is to set a rivet in the center of them first, and then stitch around the outside edge after you've got them riveted in place. I'm going to go probably about 1.5 inches down from the edge, because about half of that's going to be gone after I stitch it all together and finish it up. It's going to be seam allowance. And we'll sort of center things up. And we'll just mark here at, and we'll just punch the holes. Here at 4 and 8 inches. Not really 4 and 8 inches because I've got about 2 inches on either side. Just sort of vaguely hanging out there. Okay, that's going to be where I rivet the handles on. Pop it on there and there, and stitch. And then the rivets are being used basically the same way I was using the basting tape to put everything else together ahead of time. It's just really there to hold it in place until I get it all stitched. But people do like having rivets in there. They think it makes stuff stronger. And you'll not disabuse them of that notion, no matter how hard you try. But rivets really tear out way before stitching does on most things. Speaking of stitching, you may want to put some kind of stitching line on there for this. Just so I have something I can see when I take it down to the machine. Okay, for most of it I'm going to be doing on my big machine, but I'm going to move over to this Singer. It's an old 281 that I have. That probably doesn't mean anything to anybody, but it's a Singer industrial machine. And I'll be using that to put the zipper together and to put the zipper at least onto these strips that are going to be attached into the bag. And to put the Velcro onto it, because this is pretty thin suede and it's too thin for my big machine. So to stitch on the Velcro, we're going to use this job here. It's basically a standard industrial machine, except I've put a servo motor on it to make it more controllable and control the speed. And I've put a walking foot attachment on it. That makes it a lot easier to handle leather, because leather tends to drag on the presser foot. So walking foot attachment is useful to keep it from bunching up while you're trying to stitch it. But we're doing basically the same thing with the zipper. We're going to use some of this basting tape. And we're going to stick it on there. You want to leave yourself enough room for the zipper pull to go through there. So you don't want to be right next to the teeth of the zipper. So this 1/4 inch wide tape is just about perfect for putting zippers in, because that's about as much as you want to cover on the edge. So you just use the tape as your guide of where you're sticking your leather on. The one disadvantage of this machine is it does not have a reverse. So you have to back stitch at the beginning, you have to stitch and then turn everything around. Okay, now this is where things start to get a little crazy and a little interesting. The bag needs to be put together, basically right sides together, and then turned right side out, with the linings on the outside, and then they'll become the inside, and so on and so forth. But to accomplish that, I'm going to be doing it in 2 pieces. I'm going to be doing a front of the bag and the back of the bag, and then the last step is there's going to be some pieces that go across the bottom of the bag and kind of sandwich it and hold it together. And that's what's actually going to hold the 2 pieces front to back, kind of like the spine on a book. But to get there, we need to next put the zipper in. And I've still got the zipper together here, but it's going to be apart whenever I'm sewing all the rest of the bag. But I want it together for now so that I get it laid in the right direction. Because if you get the zippers where the little teeth are pointing one direction on one side and they're pointing the other direction on the other side, it isn't going to work. So for now, they're together until I get it laid out, and then I'll just be able to peel the 2 parts apart by taking the zipper apart. So next step, yes, is more tape. We're going to stick it together with more tape, and then we're going to have it all ready to go to sew all the pieces in. So this is the step where it starts to take on a 3-dimensional shape, and it makes it a lot easier to use the basting tape. I am still putting some clips, beginning and some of the corners, because as you go around the corners, you can peel it off if you're not careful. By the time we're done with this step, we should have what basically looks like an inside-out bag. Okay, now we've got our basically inside-out bag put together. I did just stitch this one side already because I didn't have enough clips basically to do both of them. At least not down here in the basement where my sewing machines are. So I'll go ahead and stitch this other side together. And then it's time to go open it back up and get it figured out exactly how we're going to do everything. Oh, yeah, and this step is when I'm also going to sew in my lining pieces, which I didn't do on this other side like I should have. So I'm going to go ahead and get those sewn in as well while we're at it. Okay, so yeah, this is where things get difficult. I've got just 1/2 of the bag. I've got my suede pieces inside out. I've got my lining pieces inside out. So the right sides together. You can see this will all be the inside of the bag and the outside of the bag whenever it's done. And you can see running around through there the zipper. So this is where things get fun. So I'm going to stitch it together like this. There's a reason a lot of manufacturers will just use like a binding along an edge, because it kind of eliminates all this. They can just leave it all right side out and just run a binder around that edge. I don't like that look. I prefer that it actually be folded in like a traditional style that handmade things would have been done. But it does make it a little bit more difficult to do. Try and stitch all this together and keep it flat, and hopefully not have any mutinies where the leather decides to take over and do its own thing. Now I do have some lumps in these corners from that zipper and everything going around those corners. So you have to be a little careful of those when you get to them, that you can kind of flatten them out a little bit, straighten everything out so that your presser foot will move over it. Of course, if you're hand stitching, it's not actually as bad. Just a lot of layers to line up if you're hand stitching. It helps on these corners if you think of them as being a three-dimensional shape. As you think of them as being like you're going around the end of the inside of a rim of a bucket or something. And then you can usually get them, if you pull up on them, you can usually straighten out any lumps that are in there. There's always a few. Once you get past the corners, it's pretty much smooth sailing from there. Okay, the bottom of it is still open across the piece, about 10 or 11 inches long. Like I said, that's going to get covered up with some other leather pieces later. But for right now, that's how we're going to turn it all right side out. Now, before I turn this right side out, I'm going to trim some of this excess off around the outside edge. That makes it all just turn a little easier and fit a little easier when it's done. And that's just going around with big shears here. And kind of evening things up a bit. And then once that's trimmed, it can be turned right side out. Be a little bit of work on the corners, probably pushing them out the way they need to be, getting everything lined up the way it needs to be. Alright, now these bottom pieces that are going to go on and hold it all together, I'm just going to round out the corners, and I marked them with I've got a little template here, and I used it's a R15, so it's a 15mm radius, and just kind of used the scratch all and marked all the corners. And that's a simple way to do it. You don't have to have anything that particular. You could take a bottle cap or something that's about the right size as the radius you want, and use that to mark them too. I've done that plenty in the past. Works well. And just to line them up, I'm going to punch holes again and put more rivets through. But the rivets are just not just to hold it all together. The rivets are going to be there to hold it together until I get it stitched. And so we're going to put kind of the four corners here. And maybe one on each side on the middle. Yeah, maybe two in as we get through there. As you can tell, there's no real plan here. And I sometimes have to check zippers on something that I've got laying around before I can figure out which way these zippers are supposed to go. But basically, if you look at the little teeth, there's a point going on them. And that point should point basically up on the zipper pull, if you think about it on a jacket or a pair of jeans or something. So the direction that this would pull to close it should be the way that that little point on each of these teeth is pointed. There we go. There is a point on these sometimes you can get a hold of. You don't have to cut them, they'll actually open up. But I am not being that lucky today. So I'm just going to wind up, I think, cutting them and having little bits of zipper fly all over the room. Now once we got a few of them out of the way, I'm going to put the bottom stop of the zipper in. And this is designed, it goes around this corner on purpose before it stops, so that when the case opens up it'll lay flat. If you just bring the zippers down to the sides and down to this corner, it's easier to make the case because you can make it to where it's just a little cut in and the whole thing. It's very hard to line it without making it as two pieces like this. But like I said, you can't get the same effect. Now this other end, we're actually going to wind up stitching over it probably, so it'll probably stop the zipper from going through anyway. But we're going to do the same thing. We're going to take a few of the teeth off the end of the zipper here and try and put some top stops in, which are these little fellows here. Now these top stops, you see, are just a little bent piece of brass. Move that out of our way. And we'll just put those on there and crimp them in place just by squishing them with a pair of pliers. So they're real easy to install. Okay, now let's lay this out flat. And then we know where our rivets and stitching are going to go. Now, because of all the layers I have here, I'm going to probably do one set of rivets at a time before I lose them completely. Alright, there we go. Now this side. There we go. Got that one kind of close to where I want to stitch it, but we'll be able to get around it, I think. Now that I've got two places that this is attached together, basically, the zipper down on this end and that end, I can get everything to lay flat. I figure out where my holes are going to be and get them punched. Oh, but I want to make sure that's not underneath of it, because I don't want any extra holes in it. Okay. For some simple little rivets, that was entirely too much time. But let's make sure we got everything where it needs to be. And I'm going to take it downstairs and put some more stitches around this edge, and that'll clean up the wobbliness of it a little bit. And we should have a bag done. Alright, one last detail on this is a zipper pull. And for those, I just use a piece of lace and tie a bleed knot. Doesn't need to be that long, but that's about right. I mean, that'd make a nice zipper pull. But anyway, we're going to take that. We're going to put a slit in one side. And a little further from the fold, we'll put a slit in the other side. Maybe a bit longer than those. This is just a piece of scrap lace. Yeah, 4 ounce, 1/4 inch wide, approximately. It can just be any piece of scrap, fairly soft leather. Will do. Oop, I got that wrong. Let's see which holes are which. Alright, so this one first. And yeah, one end comes through the hole that's a little bit closer to the center. Like that. And once you pull that through, you've got your other hole slit that you made right there. And this end is going to go through that one. And that's just a simple little detail to add on, to add a zipper pull onto, well, basically anything. And it's pretty easy to do, and a use of, scrap leather.